So with that, we'll call panel 2 to the witness table, and the second panel is composed of Majed Shafi and Amjad Khan. And I don't know if one of you has a preference of going first. I'll let you decide whomever would go first. Mr. Khan.
Thank you very much, Representative Pitts. It's an honor to be here. I want to first begin by thanking the Commission for holding this very important hearing, and also to commend you for your leadership on this issue. I have a longer version, a written submission, and I asked the permission of the Commission to submit the full extent of my remarks into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
The Ahmadiyya Muslim community is arguably the most persecuted Muslim community in the world. The U.S. State Department, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, and dozens of reputable and prominent human rights NGOs have documented the systematic persecution endured by the community at the hands of religious extremists and state institutions. Over the past several decades, hundreds of Ahmadi Muslims have been murdered in Pakistan, and dozens more in Bangladesh and in Indonesia. In 2010 alone, 99 Ahmadi Muslims were murdered in Pakistan. That was the deadliest year ever for the community in over 120 years. The persecution of the community, Representative Pitts, is pervasive and cuts very deep. What I wanted to do is first begin by providing just a very short overview of the community that may help explain why it continues to be a prime target of extremists who purport to represent Islam. The Ahmadis belong to a contemporary Islamic revival movement that was founded in 1889 by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, who was born in a small village of Qadian in India. The fundamental difference between the Ahmadiyya Muslim community and the Sunni Muslim majority concerns the identity of the Messiah. This is the reformer that the Prophet Muhammad predicted would appear after him and who all Muslims await. The Ahmadi Muslims believe that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad is that messianic figure, is that Messiah. And his chief aim and purpose was to revive Islam by ending religious wars, condemning bloodshed, and reinstituting morality, justice, and peace. The community claims a worldwide membership exceeding tens of millions in over 195 countries, with the largest concentrations in South Asia and West Africa. And the headquarters are in the United Kingdom, where its international leader, His Holiness Mirza Masroor Ahmad, currently resides. So with that very brief background, let me now first turn to Pakistan to discuss the deteriorating conditions for the community. For 6 decades, the community has endured wide-ranging abuses in Pakistan. On May 28, 2010, the community watched in horror as armed gunmen from the Pakistani Taliban, the TTP, which is a group designated by the State Department to be a major terrorist organization, attacked hundreds of Ahmadi Muslim worshippers who were gathered for Friday prayers at 2 mosques in model town Lahore. When the dust had cleared, 86 Ahmadis were dead. This was the largest single attack against the community ever, and one of the deadliest terrorist attacks in Pakistan's history. There are an estimated 3 or 4 million Ahmadi Muslims currently living in Pakistan. Ahmadi Muslims profess to be Muslims, but their belief is irrelevant under the law. And that is because that Pakistan is the only Islamic state in the world to define who is or is not a Muslim for purposes of its constitution. This is Article 260. And significantly, the Second Amendment to Pakistan's constitution, which was passed in 1974, explicitly deprives members of the Ahmadiyya community of their right to self-identify as Muslims. Since that amendment in 1974, over 300 Ahmadis have been killed. As has been well chronicled by the international community, since 1984, Pakistan uses its criminal code to prohibit and punish blasphemy. And Chairman Leo mentioned this in his remarks. Blasphemy in Pakistan broadly refers to any spoken or written representation that, quote, directly or indirectly outrages the religious sentiments of Muslims. So 5 of Pakistan's current penal code provisions punish blasphemy, and these are collectively referred to as the anti-blasphemy laws. In 28 years, more than 1,000 people have been arrested under these laws, and these individuals, they represent a broad spectrum of Muslims, be they Sunni, Shia, or Ahmadi, Christians, and Hindus. And their crimes are wide-ranging and quite trivial. Their punishments range from fines to indefinite detention to life imprisonment to capital punishment. No one to date has been executed in Pakistan under the blasphemy laws, but at least 32 individuals have been killed by mobs after they had been arrested for blasphemy. And the most notorious of these 5 laws is a 50-word law, Section 295C, which is a very broad and vague statute. It says that whoever by words, either spoken or written, or by visible representation, or by any imputation, innuendo, or insinuation, directly or indirectly defiles the sacred name of the Prophet Muhammad shall be punished with death, life imprisonment, and shall also be liable to a fine. These are the 50 words of that statute. Based on that remarkably broad language, virtually anyone can register a blasphemy case against anyone else in Pakistan, and the accused can face capital punishment. For Ahmadis, these laws have essentially criminalized their very existence. Now, 2 of these 5 laws actually explicitly target the activities of Ahmadis. These are called Ordinance 20. And for fear of being charged as indirectly or directly posing as a Muslim, Ahmadi Muslims can't profess their faith either verbally or in writing. In light of this, Pakistani police have destroyed Ahmadi translations of the Quran, banned Ahmadi publications, the use of any Islamic terminology on wedding invitation cards, on tombstones, the displaying of the Islamic creed, the kalima on mosques. Police have actually taken that down forcibly. So basically, any public act of worship, devotion, or propagation by an Ahmadi is treated as a criminal offense, punishable by fine, imprisonment, or death. And over 40% of all arrests are of Ahmadi Muslims, and the situation grows dire each passing year. There's an example that I wanted to state for the record. In 2009, there were 4 Ahmadi school teenagers in the Laya district. They were charged with blasphemy for allegedly writing the name of Muhammad on the walls of a mosque's toilet. These were purely fabricated charges. The BBC documented them. They served 6 months in prison, and they continue to face blasphemy charges, the threat of blasphemy. And it's cases like these that are not uncommon. In prior years, elderly Ahmadi women, Ahmadi mothers, Ahmadi infants have fallen victims to these laws. It spares nobody. And the persecution of the community goes beyond the blasphemy laws. Owing to pressure from religious extremists, Pakistani authorities have demolished, set on fire, forcibly occupied, sealed, or barred the construction of over 90 mosques belonging to the Ahmadi community. I should note that an Ahmadi can't refer to their mosque as a mosque. That too is an arrestable offense. After the Lahore attacks, there was a press conference because it was such a major attack, and while there, the spokesperson for the Ahmadi community said, the 2 mosques that were attacked, I cannot, for the record, say they're mosques without you arresting me. So that it's a very tragic situation. Even the cemetery burial of Ahmadi Muslims is denied. Bodies are exhumed because they're the wrong kind of Muslims. And significantly, the state security, and this is important because it's not just religious extremists, it's state institutions that facilitate this. The police knew about the attacks that were to happen on the Ahmadi community by the Pakistani Taliban. The chairperson for the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan, Asma Jahangir, sent letters to the authorities saying these attacks are imminent, and yet they took no action, and in the end, 86 people were dead. Now, over the past year, Representative Pitts, the situation has gone from bad to worse. In June of 2011, the All Pakistan Students Khatm-e-Nabuwat Federation distributed shocking anti-Ahmadi pamphlets in Faisalabad, which is one of Pakistan's largest cities. The pamphlets encouraged the outright assassination of a select group of Ahmadis by name. Their names were listed, their addresses were listed. And the letter said that they are wajibul qatl, which means worthy of being killed. When the Ahmadi leaders approached the police and said this hit list, which has a name and phone number of the people who are perpetrating it, should be investigated, there was no attention. There was no investigation. And as a result, right now, thousands of Ahmadis in Faisalabad live in fear. And just a few weeks ago, there was an assassination attempt on the president of our community in Faisalabad. He barely survived, but 2 people with him were severely injured. And then earlier this year, 5,000 people held a rally in Rawalpindi, and this was this included extremists and representatives from trade unions. They gathered outside an Ahmadi Muslim mosque, and they called for the demolition of the mosque, and they said Ahmadis were wajibul qatl. And again, the police have failed to take action. And I want to conclude with my description of Pakistan by highlighting 2 critical issues for this commission. These 2 issues uniquely affect the Ahmadi community. The blasphemy laws, as you know, affect a wide group, but these 2 issues affect the Ahmadis in particular. The first issue concerns the right to vote in Pakistan. From 1978 to 2002, Pakistan employed a separate electorate system that put non-Muslims and Ahmadi Muslims on separate voting lists, and that was abolished by President Musharraf on February 27, 2002. It was an executive order he passed, Executive Order 7. This was a great step. The international community said this is terrific. We now have one person, one vote in Pakistan. But in a remarkable move, 4 months later, he passed Executive Order 15, which said that that original order restoring the joint electorate did not apply to the Ahmadis. They were excluded from the joint electorate. The only way an Ahmadi can vote in Pakistan is if he or she declares himself to be a non-Muslim, declares the founder of our community to be an impostor, and adds their name to a supplemental list. Now, of course, no Ahmadi Muslim should or would ever agree to these patently discriminatory conditions. So as a result, Ahmadis are the only religious group in Pakistan today to be excluded from the joint electorate, and this has persisted for over 10 years. The disenfranchisement of Ahmadi Muslims adversely impacts all Pakistanis because Ahmadis have a remarkable literacy rate. They're among Pakistan's most educated citizenry. So it's a huge block of 3 million people who can't vote. And the second issue concerns the Pakistan citizenship forms. The first is the passport form. So for all Pakistanis, if you want to renew your passport, you have to fill out a form. Every Pakistani, in order to get a passport, has to denounce Ahmadi Muslim beliefs and declare the founder of our community to be an impostor. Every Pakistani, in order to get your passport renewed. In other words, the government of Pakistan forces all Pakistani Muslims seeking passports to swear under penalty of perjury their explicit opposition to our community. And recently, earlier this month, the National Database and Registration Authority of Pakistan instituted a new national ID card, and they have a new category called Qadiani, which is a derogatory term for our community. So if you're an Ahmadi, you have to register as a Qadiani, not a Muslim, not a non-Muslim, as a Qadiani, a separate politically charged term, just to get a national ID card. So those 2 issues in particular, Representative Pitts, are issues that I think the United States can do something about. The restoration of citizenship rights is something that's less politically charged than the blasphemy laws, and it's by a stroke of a pen, the Executive Order 15 can be repealed. I'm short of time, and I just briefly wanted to highlight 2 incidences in India and Bangladesh and conclude my testimony. Ahmadis are being targeted all over India. The headquarters of the Ahmadi community, it was founded in India in 1889. There are millions of Ahmadis who are spread across India. It's fared much better than Pakistan, but there's an increasing chorus of radical voices demanding that Ahmadi Muslims be declared non-Muslim following Pakistan's example. There are demands that Ahmadis can't do the Hajj, their books are banned. There's efforts to stop their conventions. Recently, in New Delhi, the local police prevented Ahmadi Muslims from holding a Quran exhibit. And in Andhra Pradesh, they've classified Ahmadis as non-Muslims and said that their mosques should be not deemed as such. So this is spreading in India. And in Bangladesh, there are roughly 100,000 Ahmadi Muslims there. There's been a storied history of persecution of the community for many years. In 2001, up until 2006, the government banned the books, Ahmadi books and publications. It's improved markedly since 2006, but the State Department recent report notes that it's getting worse, and local authorities in the Ghazipur district, also in Tangail, have cracked down heavily on Ahmadis, and there's been a smattering of attacks against Ahmadis in Bangladesh. So right now I've only provided a brief sketch of the persecution just in South Asia. But the persecution of the Ahmadi community is worldwide. In the Middle East, in Egypt, in UAE, in Egypt, 10 of our Ahmadi Muslims, the central leadership, were all arrested under the Article 98F blasphemy law. This was under Hosni Mubarak's regime. In UAE, there's laws against us. In Palestine, in Kazakhstan, in the Kyrgyz Republic, in Indonesia, 27 provinces have banned the Ahmadi community. There's a growing, I briefed this commission last year about Indonesia in particular. So really the source of all of this are religious extremists who espouse a militant perversion of Islam. And our community, it's in our DNA to oppose such extremism. That's what our founder preached. And we strongly believe that that must be cut at its root. We welcome all the efforts of this commission and appreciate the opportunity here to testify. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khan. I'll begin the questioning to Mr. Khan. Pakistan's openly discriminatory anti-Ahmadi laws remain in place, as you've said, and clearly violate international standards for religious freedom. In your opinion, what is the outlook for changes in the relevant laws, and what can the United States government do to encourage the Pakistani government to reform those laws?
Thank you, Representative Pitts. That's a very important question. So a two-part answer. With respect to the outlook of the constitutionality or challenges to the anti-blasphemy laws in Pakistan, the outlook is very bleak for several reasons. First and foremost, the laws were challenged formally before the Pakistan Supreme Court in a case Zahiruddin versus State in 1993, and the Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of those laws. It was also challenged in Federal Syariah Court, the highest religious court, and again in 1988, and those laws were upheld. So in terms of legal recourse within Pakistan, the outlook is very bleak. There possibly could be renewed challenges, but in the face of Zahiruddin, it's storied precedent. As politically within Pakistan, the issue is tenuous. Those voices who are most courageous in trying to reform the blasphemy laws were silenced. We know about Governor Tasir, and we know about Minister Shahbaz Bhatti, both of whom pushed very hard for reforms. There's marginal reforms that are in play. For example, the first information report, which is the criminal document that is brought for these blasphemy charges. There was some reform to make it, to punish frivolous claims, but that has died in government and in discussion, and there's no real reform on the table as yet. But we're hopeful that possibly could change. However, internationally, the story is different. The most important human rights covenant in the world, the ICCPR, to which Pakistan is the signatory and in 2010 ratified, Articles 18, 19, 20, and 27 very much protect religious freedom, the right to change your faith, freedom of conscience. In the face of those provisions, the anti-blasphemy laws cannot survive, and very significantly, reservations as to the ICCPR, which Pakistan had in place, which basically said if there's a law and order justification, if there's a reason to have these anti-blasphemy laws, we can have them, have been withdrawn by Pakistan. So now, in the Universal Periodic Review, Pakistan is up for that review next month. A major question before the international audience is how can Pakistan's blasphemy laws survive in light of the withdrawal of the reservations from the ICCPR ratification. So I'm optimistic that that issue has to be answered in the international community, and Pakistan should be held accountable for that. And it follows thereafter that indeed the laws should be repealed to abide by international human rights commitments.
And what can the international community do?
So the international community, I think first and foremost, the Universal Periodic Review, which is next month, NGOs and those who are interested parties and, of course, member states have an open questioning of Pakistan's commitment every 4 years. So in the past 4 years, since 2008, what has Pakistan done to improve and reform the blasphemy laws? That was posed to them in 2008. Now, in light of the ratification, withdrawal of reservations, those questions are very critical. That debate is very critical, and Pakistan should be answerable to that. So I do believe that the international community, including the United States, has a major role to play in that regard.
Thank you. Thank you. Just one final, Mr. Khan, on the Ahmadis. You mentioned a hit list in Faisalabad, police failing to take action. Has our State Department engaged on this at all? Have you notified the State Department?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. We've actually briefed the State Department every month on these issues. On that particular issue, which was the hit list, that was raised. The actual list itself, a copy of it, was also submitted. Whether there's been follow-up or investigation on the ground, I'm not aware of. But certainly has been raised at the highest levels. There's indication that several of those Ahmadis on that list are being threatened, indeed may have been killed. I mean, in the past 6 months, there's been maybe 6 or 7 Ahmadis who've been killed. I mentioned the assassination attempt on the president of the community in Faisalabad. I would very much recommend that there be an actual answer to the question of whether the police have, in fact, investigated that particular document. The language in that document, which is not just in Faisalabad, it's rampant throughout publications. There's maybe 80 or 90 billboards using the phrase Wajibul Qatl, Ahmadis are worthy of being killed, openly in Lahore. We provided all of that information to the State Department. There's ample evidence, hard evidence, overwhelming evidence that Ahmadis are being targeted for their beliefs. There's even on media airwaves, on the major channel Geo TV, they had a major program in which some of the leaders said that Ahmadis are Wajibul Qatl. A day later, 2 Ahmadis were gunned down. This was a few years ago. So this is permeated not just locally in the provincial level, but also in the federal level, as well as just inaction, acting with impunity, and that I think can be rectified.
And you said there are 3 million in Pakistan?
Yes, the estimates
How many in India?
Yeah, there's about the same number in India as well. It's a very large, sizable population, several million in South Asia. And Bangladesh, there's 100,000 as well. So it's a very large concentration of Ahmadis. Many Ahmadis after the Lahore attacks have had to flee Pakistan. In my pro bono practice, I represent many refugees, many of those Ahmadis, hundreds of those Ahmadis. In those cases, the State Department has done an admirable job in helping assist with refugee processing, and PRM has worked very hard on that, particularly Assistant Secretary Schwartz. But the major issues on the ground in Pakistan are very disturbing, and I would again repeat the emphasis should be on the restoration of citizenship rights, particularly the right to vote. Ahmadis have contributed to civil service at the highest levels. The first foreign minister of Pakistan was an Ahmadi. He's also president of the General Assembly of the UN, president of the International Court of Justice, Sir Zafrullah Khan. So there's been many Ahmadis in high government, so it actually behooves the country to empower such a block of voters and allow them to vote freely. And I think that is an executive order that should be repealed.
And Mr. Khan, Pakistan's openly discriminatory anti-Ahmadi laws remain in place, which they clearly violate international standards for religious freedoms. You may have already answered this, but I'm just curious, what is the outlook for changes in relevant laws? And again, Pakistan's another place where I'm not quite sure how much influence we have. I mean, what is it that we can do to constructively influence these governments? I mean, one of the things I worry sometimes is if we push, then it creates a backlash sometimes. And I want to make sure that when we push, that we're doing it in a way that actually encourages the kind of changes, which we want these governments to take. I think any advice you have would be greatly appreciated.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, those are very important questions. As I mentioned earlier in response to Congressman Pitt's question, there is prospects for reform. There are prospects for reform within Pakistan. With respect to the blasphemy laws, those have been in place for 28 years,
Right.
and it's been very difficult to change that on the ground without consequence. We know that those who were the most vocal opponents of those laws were assassinated. There are changes within Parliament to make it more difficult to bring the first information report, which is the critical key legal document that initiates these cases. And I think that can, marginal incremental reform, perhaps not repealing the laws outright, can actually be done, but it'll take a lot of, frankly, it'll take a lot of effort, both domestically and abroad, to achieve that. I think a more realistic approach on the issue of the Ahmadi persecution is really to push for the restoration of citizenship rights. I mentioned in my testimony the Pakistan passport form. So every Pakistani who needs to renew his passport has to openly declare that our community is a false community and oppose us under penalty of perjury. It is documents like that that can easily be changed. The lack of the right to vote, being excluded from the joint electorate when every other citizen of Pakistan can vote, but Ahmadis cannot vote unless they declare something they're not, as someone who they aren't. I think that is very troubling, and the Executive Order 15 in June of 2002 that achieved that can be repealed. I think the U.S. has an important role in the ongoing dialogue and strategic considerations that they are exploring with Pakistan to raise the issue of restoration of voting rights for Ahmadis. I think that's something that will help the nation, it'll help the country, so I think that is something that can be pushed. It is a very difficult situation, but I do believe that for 6 decades, Ahmadis have been suffering, and that suffering has gone worse and worse each year. And I think that the time has come that beyond soft power, that there should be very high-level discussions around empowering the most moderate groups within Pakistan. Ahmadis are a tiny fraction of the population, maybe 1.5%, but they represent almost 20% of the literate population. So 1 out of every 5 literate Pakistanis is an Ahmadi. That suggests that the Ahmadi community is a community that should be empowered, and it's tragic and sad that they aren't. So I hope that this hearing and in our ongoing briefings with the State Department, we brief the State Department regularly, that we can raise these issues, and I do have hope that it can change, particularly on the citizenship rights side of things.
Well, thank you. That was very